What is going on, chess YouTube? In today's video, Vidit Gujrathi, the Indian superstar, and the GOAT, Magnus Carlsen, they play an out-of-this-world game in the French Defense opening at the 2023 Speed Chess Championships. And here we go. In the game, Vidit Gujrathi opens 1e4 best by test, and Magnus Carlsen does go 1e6 the French Defense. Then we have d4 and d5 on the board, and here on move 3, Vidit does play the main line for white. That is the move knight to c3. Now here on move 3, how is Magnus going to respond? Well, the main lines for black are knight to f6 and bishop b4, but instead he plays an interesting sideline in the French on move 3. He actually goes knight to c6, and this already is a very rare move for black. What's the idea behind this move? Well, first of all, the drawback is you do block in that pawn on c7. Typically in the French, black is going to go c5, challenging white's pawn on d4, and that is simply not possible here. However, there is an idea behind this move. If white goes e5, expanding in the center, then black's idea likely will be f6 in the spirit of the great grandmaster Ben Feingold, challenging white's pawn on e5, and that knight will be well placed for that scenario. However, here Vidit, he does not go e5. Instead, he just goes knight to f3, just bringing out his two knights and staying very flexible. Now here Magnus Carlsen, knight to f6 on the board, challenging the pawn on the e4 square, and here Vidit does go e5. So e5 on the board, and of course f6 is not possible right now. The knight does have to move, and where is the knight going to go? Well, the typical square for the knight on f6 when white goes e5 in the French defense is going to be d7. However, in this position, knight d7 is not a good move. Again, that knight on c6 does block in that pawn on c7, meaning c5 is not possible, and black will have to find counterplay elsewhere. And in the game, Magnus does find the best move, knight to e4. Now, this move is a little bit surprising. Typically, you don't go knight to e4 when white can take on e4, damaging black's pawn structure. However, in this position, it does seem to work out. And here's the idea. If white takes on e4, that would be a massive mistake. The idea is d takes e4, and then suddenly the knight on c6 and the queen on d8 pile up pressure on that pawn on d4. That d4 pawn will be lost, and black would immediately have a large advantage out of the opening. So, knight takes e4 is not possible. Magnus Carlsen making good use of his knight to c6 move on move 3 in this French defense opening. Now here, Vidit Gujrathi, he stays flexible. Bishop d3, putting pressure on the knight. Now, of course, the threat is knight takes e4 and then bishop takes e4, winning a clean pawn, as that pawn on d4 would be defended by the knight on f3 and the queen on d1. So Magnus Carlsen, what is he going to do about this threat? Well, in the game, Magnus goes bishop b4 in the spirit of the Winaver variation of the French defense, and now the threat is simple. Knight takes c3, and then b takes, then bishop takes c3, winning a clean pawn. And of course, that knight on c3 is being pinned to the king. Therefore, knight takes and then bishop takes is not a possibility here in this position. All right, Vidit, what should he do about this threat? Well, it turns out Vidit has two good options in this position. The first one, the maximalist approach, is you can sacrifice the pawn. You simply go short castles, allowing black to go knight takes, b takes, and then bishop takes c3, winning the pawn. The idea being after rook to b1, the rook is safe, and you have very good attacking chances with your lead in development. Instead, in the game, Vidit does play it safe. He goes bishop d2, a very solid choice, defending the c3 square. That way, after knight takes, b takes, that pawn is defended. However, here, Magnus Carlsen, he doesn't take on c3. Instead, he just gobbles up that bishop on d2, knight takes d2, and here Magnus does have the bishop pair in this position, and that will be a very large asset throughout this game. Now Vidit, queen takes d2, and here Magnus Carlsen, he has to find the right continuation. What is it going to be? Well, short castles is an option. However, in the game, I think Magnus was concerned about putting his king on the king side. Vidit would have a lot of very aggressive attacking ideas, especially the idea h4 then h5 in the spirit of alpha 0. Instead here, he does go h6, a quiet waiting move. However, it turns out this move does weaken the king side quite a bit, and here Vidit will be fighting for an advantage. In the game, he starts a3, knocking back that bishop on b4. Where is it going to go? Well, b takes c3 is not a good idea. Then queen takes regains the bishop, and Vidit will win back that bishop without having to damage his pawn structure. That would be a very good trade for him. So with that in mind, here Magnus, he just retreats the bishop. Bishop e7 on the board, maintaining the tension. But here Vidit, he finds a very aggressive attacking continuation. Here Vidit doesn't bother castling on the king side or on the queen side. Instead, he starts the attack immediately with the move h4, gaining space on the king side. And this move has a lot of ideas. First of all, Vidit is threatening h4, then h5. That would clamp down on the king side. Beyond that, he now has the resource rook to h3, then rook g3, piling up pressure on that weak g7 point of Magnus Carlsen. So overall here, Vidit already showing his aggressive attacking intentions in this game. Now here, Magnus Carlsen, what should he be doing? Well, it turns out now, after the moves h6 and h4 included, castling on the king side is almost suicide. Vidit will just have too many attacking ideas. For example, h5, again, rook h3 to g3, even queen f4, and then queen g4 or g3 would be dangerous. So with that in mind, Magnus does not castle on the king side here. Instead, he goes b6, starting his counterplay on the queen side. And now this move has a lot of ideas. First of all, you do have the option of a5 and then bishop a6. Try to trade off your so-called bad bishop, that being the light squared bishop. That bishop is currently blocked in by those pawns on e6 and d5, so trading that bishop off would be a very good strategic achievement in this game. However, beyond that, Magnus also has the option of knight to a5 and then c5, finally getting counterplay going on the queen side, and of course that knight on a5 would be defended by the b pawn, so we'll have to wait and see which of those plans Magnus wants to go for in this game. Now here, Vidit, as usual, he has a wide variety of ideas that he could choose from. For example, knight e2 is good, intending knight f4, h5 is good, rook h3, intending rook g3 is good, and also queen f4, intending queen g4 or g3 is good. In the game, Vidit does go for the first option, knight e2, a very strong idea. The idea being the knight now has access to that f4 square. Knight to f4 is a possibility, and if Magnus does go knight a5, then c5, c3 will be a move, bolstering that pawn on d4, maintain the very strong pawn center on d4 and e5. Now, Magnus Carlsen, in the game, he does not go e5 and then bishop a6. Instead, he goes for the other option, knight to a5, intending c5, getting counterplay on the queen side. Now here, Vidit, he continues queen to f4, a strong idea, intending perhaps queen g4 or queen g3, again putting pressure on that very weak g7 pawn of Magnus Carlsen. Now here, Magnus, he continues c5, expanding on the queen side. Vidit goes c3, bolstering that pawn on d4. That is essentially the only option here for Vidit. And now Magnus Carlsen, he has to find a plan. His king is still stuck in the center. His bishop is still weak. What's it going to be? Well, again, Magnus has many different moves he can choose from. Bishop b7, d7, knight c4 are all possible. However, in the game, he goes for a more double-edged idea. c4, gaining space on the queen side, pushing back that bishop, but also fixing the pawn structure in the center and on the queen side and relieving the tension. So a very double-edged idea by Magnus. Now bishop c2 is virtually forced. Bishop c2 on the board. And now Magnus, he continues his development on the queen side. Bishop d7 on the board, intending perhaps queen c7 and long castles. Now here, Vidit Gujrathi, h5, gaining space on the king side, and he is ready for queen g3 or rook h3, then g3, piling up on g7. Now Magnus, queen c7, intending perhaps long castles next. And here the very strong idea by Vidit, rook to h3. We're seeing the rook lift in the game. Now rook g3 is a threat that would be very dangerous. All right, Magnus Carlsen, what does he do about this threat? Well, it turns out he does very little. He plays bishop c6, sort of a waiting move, not yet castling, sort of waiting to see what Vidit is going to do, and Vidit does not slow down. He goes queen g4, piling up pressure on that weak g7 point, and now queen takes g7 is a very real threat. What is Magnus going to do about it? In the game, he does not go g6. That would be suicide. Instead, bishop f8 does defend the pawn, but now short castles is no longer a move, and here that bishop is very passive on the f8 square. All right, knight to h4 for Vidit, piling up the pressure, a very strong move. The idea being he wants to go f4 and then f5, opening up more lines of attack on the king side. And if he can get that move in, then the e6 pawn will be weak. F takes followed by queen takes will be a very real threat, and knight to f4 may be coming as well, again piling up on that e6 pawn. All right, Magnus Carlsen, what's he going to do here? Instead of long castles, he actually jumps in with the knight. Knight to b3, piling up pressure on that rook on a1. Now, bishop takes b3 is a legal move, but you don't want to do that. That light squared bishop is so important for the attack. So with that in mind, here, rook d1 is the move for Vidit, keeping the rook and the bishop alive. Now Magnus does castle, long castle on the queen side, and then Vidit continues his plan, f4, gaining space on the king side, and now f5 is a very, very real threat. All right, Magnus Carlsen, what's he going to do about this threat of f5 from Vidit? Well, the strongest move here for Magnus, believe it or not, is bishop e7, giving up that pawn on g7 if Vidit wants it. The idea being that bishop is now more active, and you are threatening bishop takes h4, trying to get rid of white's very strong attacking piece, that being the knight on the h4 square. Instead here, Magnus, he plays a waiting move. king b8. Getting the king off this diagonal here, a decent idea, but it is a little bit slow. And here Vidit, he continues the attack, f5 on the board, again threatening f takes, then queen takes after f takes e6 back. So Magnus has to respond. In the game, he does go bishop d7, defending the pawn, but Vidit's not done. Knight to f4, piling up the pressure, and now f takes, knight takes is a very real threat, as that pin by the bishop on the knight to the queen would not be a big deal. That knight could be defended by bishop f5 in the future. All right, here, Magnus Carlsen, what's it going to be? In the game, bishop e7 is the move, putting pressure on that knight on h4 and trying to distract Vidit. Now, queen takes g7 is a possibility, but Vidit, he ignores that move. He simply goes f takes e6. Now we have f takes from Magnus Carlsen back, and now here Vidit, he has the option of taking on e6. But is that the right move, and does Vidit play it in the game? All right, Chess YouTube, time for a puzzle. Do you think Vidit Gujrathi took that pawn on e6 in this position, or did he do something else? And while you're at it, go ahead and smash that YouTube like button. Thank you so much. Helps me out a ton. All right, here, in this position, Vidit Gujrathi, he does not take on e6. It turns out that is a weaker move. Black could follow queen to c8, and that would put a lot of pressure on this diagonal with that knight being pinned to the queen. Instead here, Vidit, first, he goes knight h to g6, jumping in with the knight, putting pressure on the rook on h8, and threatening knight takes e7. Therefore, rook h to e8 is forced by Magnus Carlsen. And again, instead of knight takes e6, Vidit doesn't have to play that right away. Instead, he goes rook h to f3, a very good improving move. Now the rook will be very active on this open f file, and now ideas like rook to f7 are coming in the future. All right, Magnus Carlsen, he starts to fight back. Bishop g5, a very active move, threatening bishop takes f4, knocking off one of Vidit's very important attacking pieces. What is Vidit going to do? Well, in the game, he retreats knight f to h3, giving up on that idea of knight takes e6, instead pressuring the bishop and threatening rook to f7, and suddenly all of Vidit's pieces would be in very aggressive positions. Now, Magnus Carlsen, he knows if he just retreats bishop e7, that could be game over. Vidit would just be too active after rook to f7. So with that in mind, he finds a much stronger idea in this position, a very imbalanced move. And once again, if you like puzzles, pause the video right now and try to find this key idea for Magnus Carlsen in this position. And here's your one hint. This move is a shocker. All right, I hope you found it. Here, Magnus Carlsen, he jumps in with the bishop into enemy territory. He goes bishop c1, a madman's move. Now the threat, of course, is bishop takes b2. However, here's the drawback of this move. Here, Vidit simply goes bishop takes b3, winning the knight on b3 and removing the defender of the bishop. If Magnus goes c takes b3, then rook takes c1 will be the move. He will be up a piece and he will win the game for sure. So what the heck was Magnus Carlsen's idea in this position? Well, he does not go c takes b3. Instead, bishop takes b2 is the move, winning the b2 pawn. And here Vidit, his bishop on b3 is hanging, therefore bishop c2 is the move. And now Magnus Carlsen, bishop takes a3, winning yet another pawn. All right, Chess YouTube, this was the idea. Magnus went bishop c1, knowing he had to sacrifice the knight on b3, but in return, he won the b2 pawn and the a3 pawn. He now has a pass pawn on the queen side, and he now has counterplay in the flow, pushing those pawns down the board as fast as he can. All right, this is going to be a wild game from here. In the game, rook to a1 from Vidit. And now Magnus Carlsen, where is the bishop going to go? Well, in the game, I expected bishop e7, but instead, Magnus Carlsen, he plays yet another madman's move. Bishop b2, going after the pawn on the c3 square. Magnus Carlsen, he wants to go bishop takes c3, getting 3 connected pass pawns on the queen side. All right, Vidit, rook a2 pressures the bishop, and sure enough, Magnus Carlsen here, he has no other choice. The bishop is trapped. He simply goes bishop takes c3, giving up the second piece for an extra pawn. The bishop sacrifice. Now rook takes c3. And now here, Magnus Carlsen in this position, he is down 2 full pieces, but he has 3 connected pass pawns on the queen side. You don't see that every day. All right, here, Magnus Carlsen, b5 on the board, gaining space on the queen side. He has to get those pawns rolling as soon as he can. But here, Vidit, he is on top of things. Rook c to a3 is the move, threatening rook takes a7, trading off his 2 rooks for the queen and getting a pawn in the process. What is Magnus going to do about it? Well, the strongest move here, believe it or not, is b4. You ignore the threat and get your pawns rolling on the queen side. Instead of that here, Magnus Carlsen, he goes bishop to c6. I think the idea being rook d7 next, defending the pawn. However, here Vidit, he does not slow down. Rook takes a7 on the board, flying in with the rook, giving up the 2 rooks for the pawn and the queen. And that will be roughly an even material trade, so no rook sacrifices here in this game. All right, queen b6 on the board for Magnus. He's trying to avoid the queen trade, but Vidit doesn't let up. He goes rook to a6, and here the queen is trapped. Here queen takes a7 is forced. So queen takes, rook takes, then king takes on the board. And let's slow down and do a material count. Here in this position, Vidit, he is up 2 minor pieces. He has literally the 2 extra knights. We have 2 rooks versus the queen. And Magnus, most importantly, he has those 2 connected pass pawns on the queen side. The entire game will focus around Magnus trying to push those pawns down the board and Vidit trying to defend. All right, from here, knight g to f4, bringing the knights back into the game closer to the queen side. But Magnus b4, he's going for it on the queen side. Now we have knight takes e6, winning the free pawn, but Magnus Carlsen, bishop d7, pinning the knight to the queen. Vidit has to defend. I mean, he has to go bishop f5 or knight h to f4, defending the knight, right? Well, in the game, he doesn't. He goes queen takes g7, winning a pawn, but giving up the knight on e6. And here Magnus takes the free knight, rook takes e6, and now bishop f5 pressures the rook, and if the rook moves, then the idea is bishop takes d7, potentially winning that bishop on d7. And here's why. Both rook e7 and rook d6, the only 2 moves that would defend the bishop with the rook, they are not available. Rook d6, you lose the rook to e takes d6, and rook e7, queen takes e7, wins the rook. Therefore, Magnus has to go somewhere else. In the game, rook to b6, supporting that b pawn, perhaps the strongest idea. And here Vidit, instead of bishop takes d7 right away, the problem with that move is Magnus would go rook b7, pinning the bishop to the queen on g7. Therefore, instead, queen to e7 is the move for Vidit. Of course, there were stronger ideas like e6. We'll see that move throughout this game. But instead, queen e7 on the board for Vidit. And now Magnus Carlsen, he's got 1 shot to win this game, and he goes for it. b3, pushing that b pawn down the board. Now Vidit has to defend. What is the best idea here? Well, while we're at it, it's another good time for a puzzle. Go and pause the video right now if you like puzzles and try to find the best idea for Vidit in this position. All right, I hope you found it. Here, the best idea, believe it or not, is going to be e6, pushing that pass pawn on the e file up the board, threatening e takes d7, and ignoring the threat of b2, pushing Magnus Carlsen's pawn down the board. However, instead, in the game, Vidit does go king d2, bring the king over to the defense of the pawns, but this turns out to be a little bit weaker, and here Magnus does have counterplay. b2 on the board, threatening b1, then bishop takes, and then rook takes would be the sequence, and Magnus would win back that bishop. Now, of course, the rook on d8 is hanging in this position. Vidit has the option of queen takes d8. Will Vidit go for it? It turns out, no, he does not. Queen takes d8 would not be a good move. Again, b1 promoted to a queen is too strong. Instead here, Vidit, he actually goes bishop b1, blockading the pawn, missing the strongest idea of e6, once again threatening e takes d7. All right, Magnus Carlsen here. He finds the strongest idea as usual. c3 on the board, hitting the king with check. The idea being if king takes, then rook c8 hits the king with check once again and gets the rook out of the attack. What is Vidit going to do? Well, one option, the safe option, is king c2, just blockading those pawns. Instead, Vidit, the aggressive player, he goes for it, the maximalist move. King takes c3, winning the pawn, but letting Magnus Carlsen go rook c8, hitting the king with check. Now the king has to move. King d2 on the board, and here Magnus, finally, rook b7, defending the bishop, keeping all his pieces alive in this game. And now the threat is rook to c1, threatening the bishop, and if the bishop moves, then c1 promotes to a queen. All right, Vidit, how is he going to defend here? Well, finally, he finds the strongest idea. Once again, that is going to be e6, pushing that pass pawn down the board, threatening e takes d7, and then d takes c8. Magnus has to respond. In the game, he goes bishop b5, activating the bishop on this diagonal here and getting it out of the attack. But Vidit, he's not slowing down. Queen to a3, hits the king on the a7 square. Bishop a6 blocks the check. The other idea, bishop b5, and now knight to f4, bringing the knight back into the game. The knight no longer on the rim, no longer being dim. All right, rook c1 on the board for Magnus, flying in with the rook, threatening rook takes b1. And how is Vidit going to defend? In the game, bishop d3, piling up pressure on that bishop, the bishop being pinned. And now queen takes a6 is a very real threat. But Magnus Carlsen, he finds the only move. Rook to a1, defending indirectly the a6 square with the rook. And now the queen is under attack. And again, b2 is a big threat here. All right, Vidit, queen c5 hits the king on a7. The king has to move. King b8 on the board. And here, Vidit Gujrathi, he says, Magnus, you are not the only person with a dangerous pass pawn in this position. He goes e7, threatening e8, promoting to a queen of his own. Now here, Magnus Carlsen, he has the option of b1 promoting, but in the game, he does not do that. He actually goes bishop b5, blocking that e8 square. Now e8 will be met by bishop takes e8, so Vidit has to find something else. In the game, he trades bishops. Bishop takes b5, winning the free bishop. But here, Magnus Carlsen, he's not done. Again, if you like puzzles, pause the video and try to find this beautiful move for Magnus Carlsen in this position. All right, I hope you found it. Here, the move, of course, is going to be rook to d1, deflecting the king. The idea being if king takes, then b1 promotes to a queen. You give up the rook, but get a new queen in return, and you will have new life in the position. All right, instead of taking, of course, Vidit, he goes king to e3, getting out of the attack. But then rook e1 once again harasses the king, and you have the indirect attack on the pawn on e7. The knight has to block the check. Knight to e2. But here, Magnus Carlsen, he gives up his rook for the e7 pawn. Rook takes e7, a temporary rook sacrifice. The idea being after the queen takes the rook, Magnus Carlsen, he has done it. He gets a new queen on the b1 square. Queen b1 is the move, and we have a game. All right, queen d6 hits the king. King has to move. King b7. Queen takes d5, winning yet another pawn. King c7 on the board. Then queen c6, king to b8, and now queen b6, king c8, bishop a6. The king hunt is on. All right, king d7, queen takes b1. Finally trading queens. We have rook takes b1 back for Magnus Carlsen. And now in the endgame, the queens are off the board. Vidit has the two minor pieces and two pawns for the rook. That is a huge advantage, but Magnus Carlsen is the greatest endgame player of all time. You can never count this guy out. All right, bishop d3 on the board, hits the rook, rook to a1, then g4, advancing the pawns on the king side. g5 is a real threat. All right, king to e6, try to blockade those pawns with king to f6, then king g5, but Vidit is ready. Bishop f5 hits the king, king to f6, then knight to g3. The idea being knight to e4, hitting the king and blockading that g5 square. Not blockading, guarding it, sorry. All right, king g5. Then we have knight to e4, king to h4. Magnus Carlsen running down the board with his king. But now Vidit, d5 on the board, threatening d6, d7, then d8. What is Magnus going to do? He goes rook d1, then d6, then rook d5, and here Vidit d7, and in this position, Magnus Carlsen resigns on the spot to Vidit. There is just no stopping that pawn from marching down the board. Wow, what a game by Vidit Gujrathi, the Indian superstar, and the GOAT, Magnus Carlsen, at the 2023 Speed Chess Championships. All right, Chess YouTube, I hope you enjoyed this game of the year. If you did, smash that like button and check out this video right here, where Magnus Carlsen gets his revenge on Vidit and crushes him with some insane attack in chess. If you enjoyed this video, I'm sure you're going to love that one, so check it out. And as always, I am not an AI robot. I can't believe you guys still think I'm an AI robot. This is me, Dr. Mike Chess, the real deal, and I'll see you in the next video.